Liam had always been meticulous. As a contractor, he knew that small, overlooked details could lead to catastrophic collapses in the future. That same precision had bled into his personal life, a life he'd spent years crafting alongside Melanie. Their marriage of 18 years wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, solid, or so he thought. It was a quiet Thursday evening when he found the receipt, barely noticeable amid the clutter of their shared desk. He wouldn't have even glanced at it if the handwriting hadn't caught his eye. Melanie's looping, elegant script, signing for a charge at a hotel downtown. The date on the receipt was last Tuesday, a night she had claimed to be at a late client meeting. For weeks, Liam had tried to ignore the creeping suspicions, dismissing the changes in Melanie as midlife restlessness. She had started dressing sharper, her auburn hair styled in ways she hadn't bothered with in years. And then there were the absences, the vague explanations, and her sudden obsession with personal space. Everyone needs time for themselves, she'd say, when he questioned her unavailability during family evenings. The receipt was the thread that unraveled the carefully constructed image of their life together. His first instinct was denial. Maybe it was work? But why a five-star hotel in the middle of their city? Why a charge for 2 entrees and an overpriced bottle of Merlot? Liam didn't sleep that night. He replayed the last few months in his mind, searching for answers in every interaction, every conversation. He thought of Rachel, his sister and confidant, and decided against calling her. This wasn't a matter for consolation yet. This was about uncovering the truth. The next morning, Melanie moved around the kitchen with the grace that had always captivated Liam. Her movements were fluid, her laughter with the children genuine. She leaned over to kiss him on the cheek before leaving for work, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. For a fleeting moment, Liam doubted his suspicions. Could he really suspect the woman who had given him 18 years of love, 2 beautiful children, and countless memories? Alex Calvert, one arm perpetually locked around her until it hurt like hell. Ha ha ha. Liam let out a little hiss. Ha ha ha. The next morning, Melanie moved around the kitchen with the work. Could he really suspect the woman who had given him 18 years of love, 2 beautiful children, and countless memories? Ha ha ha. Ha ha. Breathed in the clean smell of fresh air, her breath slowing with the nozzle. But then he remembered the receipt. Facts didn't lie, even if emotions wanted them to. He took the day off work, telling his foreman he had personal matters to attend to. Then he drove to the hotel. The lobby was immaculate, its marble floors gleaming under the soft lighting. He approached the front desk, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear the receptionist's greeting. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you?" "I'm, looking for some information about a reservation from earlier this week," Liam said, forcing a smile. "It's for my wife, Melanie Carter." The receptionist's polite mask didn't falter, but her professional boundaries clicked into place. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't disclose guest information." Of course, Liam thought. He was an outsider in this story, no matter how deeply it cut him. "Look, I just need to confirm something. She might have been here for work and I need to clear up a billing issue." His voice cracked slightly, a sliver of desperation slipping through. "Please." I don't know if I have The receptionist hesitated, her eyes softening. "One moment. Sir." She disappeared into a back office, leaving Liam with the muffled hum of distant conversations and the weight of his growing dread. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't provide details. Perhaps you should speak directly with your wife." Her careful choice of words didn't go unnoticed. Liam left the hotel, his mind buzzing. He couldn't confront Melanie, not yet. He needed more. To complete the 3-part duet, Melanie needed to be separate from Joey. The rest of the day was a haze of reconnaissance. He hired a private investigator on impulse, using the number Rachel had once shared, just in case. The investigator was calm, professional, and efficient. "She's not the first." the man had said after Liam explained his suspicions, and she won't be the last. These things, they leave traces. By the following week, the traces had turned into a trail. Photographs of Melanie meeting a man, Chris, her younger coworker. Messages exchanged on secret accounts. Whispers of stolen afternoons and nights, wrapped in deceit. Each revelation was a dagger to Liam's chest. My leg is like hanging off of me. Like I can't do this. Some more wrath. That evening, Melanie came home radiant, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight as she walked through the door. She hugged Liam, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He didn't pull away, but he didn't embrace her fully either. "How was work?" he asked, his voice level. "Busy, as usual," she said, her smile too perfect, too rehearsed. Liam nodded, masking his fury. Inside, he was crumbling, but outside, he was steel. His eyes narrowed as if sensing Liam was about to reveal too much. He knew now what had to be done. As Melanie prepared for bed that night, Liam sat alone in the living room, staring at the evidence he had collected. He thought about his children, about the life they believed in, and the life that had been built on lies. He thought about his sister's advice, to act carefully, to think before reacting. Liam wasn't sure what he would do next, but one thing was certain. Melanie and her lover had underestimated him. Betrayal wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning. End of preface. For careful drinking, the reader must never forget his love for his wife, whom he took home to bed each night. Liam stared at the evidence sprawled across his desk. Each photograph and message a piece of the puzzle that revealed Melanie's betrayal. The quiet of the night offered little solace, its silence amplifying the storm within him. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, as though mirroring the turbulence in his soul. But Liam remained composed. The window had been locked out for 7 months, yet the truth was too terrifying to admit. If he was going to confront Melanie, it wouldn't be in a fit of rage. It would be with the precision of a builder dismantling a structure that no longer served its purpose. The next morning, Melanie seemed unbothered. She hummed as she made breakfast, her back turned to Liam. The sight was almost surreal. Her movements were as fluid and familiar as they had always been, yet now they carried a weight of deceit. Liam watched her from across the kitchen table, sipping his coffee in silence. "Any plans for today?" she asked over her shoulder, her voice as light as ever. "Not much," he replied, keeping his tone even. "I thought I'd get some things done around the house." Melanie turned and smiled, her auburn hair catching the morning sunlight. "I might be late tonight. The office is swamped. You know how it is." Liam nodded, hiding the tightening of his jaw behind the rim of his mug. He knew exactly how it was. Later that day, Liam went to see his sister Rachel. He hadn't planned on involving her, but he needed someone he could trust, someone who would ground him when his emotions threatened to boil over. Rachel was in her garden, her hands deep in soil, tending to her roses. Any night, he could lie to Anna. Any night, she'd have the pretty things to say. "Hey, stranger," she said, wiping her hands on her apron as he approached. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." Liam sat on the porch steps, running a hand through his hair. "You were right," he began, his voice low. "About Melanie. She's been seeing someone else." Rachel's face fell. She joined him on the steps, her hand resting on his arm. "Oh, Liam," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, swallowing hard. "It's not just the affair. It's the lies, the way she's carried on like nothing's changed. I've got proof, Rachel. Photos, messages, everything. But I don't know what to do with it." Rachel was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the garden. "You have every right to confront her," she said finally. "But don't let your anger control you. Think about what you want. Not just revenge, but what comes after. Do you want to save your marriage? Or Is this the end? Liam exhaled, the question hanging heavily in the air. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I can't let this go. Considered carefully, I took my notebook and pen and scribbled a message. That evening, Melanie returned home later than usual. She breathed through the door, her smile bright but forced. Liam noticed the way she avoided his eyes, how she went straight to the kitchen, claiming hunger but not eating much. He sat in the living room, pretending to read the paper, but his mind was elsewhere. The evidence, still hidden in his drawer, called to him, like a dark secret, begging to be revealed. When Melanie finally joined him on the couch, Liam decided to test the waters. Long day? He asked casually. Exhausting, she replied, leaning back against the cushions. I barely had time to eat. Really? He said, raising an eyebrow. What'd you have for lunch? Whatever. Her hesitation was slight, but Liam caught it. Just a salad from that place near the office, she said with a dismissive wave. Nothing exciting. Huh. I have a catfish boner. Liam said nothing, letting the lie settle between them. He knew where she had been. He had the time-stamped photo of her and Chris leaving a downtown cafe. He could almost hear Rachel's voice in his head. Don't let your anger control you. And the controller on the table read out Liam's label, flexing efforts to slowly drag the pen and be as light and warm as possible. The next few days passed in a tense limbo. Liam continued to gather information, every new discovery fueling the fire in his chest. Meanwhile, Melanie carried on as if nothing were amiss, her laughter ringing hollow in his ears. Liam played his part, masking his turmoil with polite conversation. It was a delicate balance, and he knew it couldn't last forever. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Melanie brought up a trip she was planning with her coworkers. It's just a weekend retreat, she said, twirling her fork. Team-building stuff. And Liam met her gaze, searching for any flicker of guilt or hesitation. Sounds productive, he said. Where's it at? Just a little resort upstate, she replied, too quickly. I'll only be gone for a couple of days. Liam nodded, his mind already racing. He'd seen a message from Chris about the same weekend, suggesting they sneak away, to a cabin in the mountains. Melanie's retreat was nothing more than another cover story. Have fun, he said, forcing a smile. You deserve it. The night before her trip, Liam sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence laid out before him. He had everything he needed to confront her. Photos, texts, receipts. But how would he do it? A public confrontation would be dramatic, but chaotic. A private discussion would allow for more control, but it also meant facing her alone, with no witnesses to her reaction. He thought about Chris, the younger man who had stolen his wife's attention. Arrogant and reckless, Chris was the type who thrived on risk, believing himself invincible. Liam clenched his fists, anger flaring. If he confronted them together, would it shatter their confidence? Would it expose their deceit for the farce it was? He thought of bands, and counted off the number of times he'd been told to respond to such. Then he thought about his children. They were old enough to sense the tension, even if they didn't understand its cause. Liam didn't want them caught in the crossfire of an explosive confrontation. He owed it to them to handle this with care, no matter how much it hurt. I would want to talk to my mom first, but they said I'd have to do it, Liam told them. Sorry, but mind you, On the morning of Melanie's trip, Liam watched as she packed her suitcase, humming to herself. She kissed him goodbye, her lips warm but her eyes distant. I'll call you when I get there, she said, her voice cheerful. Liam nodded, his heart heavy. Safe travels, he said. As the door closed behind her, Liam stood in the empty house, the silence deafening. He knew what he had to do. He wouldn't wait for her to return, pretending everything was fine. This was the calm before the storm, and when it broke, Melanie and Chris would feel the full force of his resolve. The angry end of summer was just arrived, and he barely felt it. His mind whirled, his stomach turning, his body pulsing up and down and before him like a roller coaster. He pulled out his phone so he could call. William's flashlight glowed. Moreno's door. His back was to the wall, and the door unlocked, dead and buried within the dust. "I need to know what you found," he said hurriedly, switching on the light switch. "Let's look at least once." Harold came running to Harold from every direction. William picked up his phone and dialed the private investigator. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. "Send me the rest of the files. I'm ready." The cabin nestled in the mountains was remote, a picture-perfect escape for two lovers convinced of their invulnerability. Liam parked his truck a mile away, preferring the cover of the forest to the gravel driveway that wound its way to the secluded retreat. The cabin came into view slowly as he approached, its warm light spilling onto the surrounding snow, a beacon of betrayal. I didn't mean to leave this morning." He adjusted the strap of the bag slung over his shoulder, a bag not filled with anger or violence, but with meticulously collected evidence. The truth, ready to be laid bare. Liam had spent the last 2 days planning every detail of his confrontation. It wasn't impulsive anger that drove him, but a simmering clarity. He had no intention of stooping to Chris and Melanie's level of deceit. This was about reclaiming his dignity and showing them that the foundations they had built their sordid affair upon were as fragile as a sandcastle. Before the tide. From the cover of the trees, Liam watched the cabin for movement. It was small but luxurious, with large windows that framed the living room. Inside, Melanie lounged on the sofa, her auburn hair catching the firelight. She sipped from a glass of wine, her laughter drifting faintly into the night air. Chris sat across from her, his posture relaxed, his hand resting casually on her knee. The sight tightened the coil in Liam's chest, but he remained still. Patience, he reminded himself. It was a skill honed through years of work, waiting for the right moment to act, to intervene, to ensure a structure's integrity didn't collapse. Now, that patience served him well. Little by little, he made progress, bit by bit. He approached the cabin door, his boots crunching softly in the snow. With a deep breath, he knocked 3 times, the sound sharp against the stillness of the forest. Inside, the laughter stopped. Liam imagined the confused glance they must have exchanged, the brief flicker of worry, before Chris likely assured Melanie it was nothing. The door creaked open, revealing Crisp's smug face, his confidence faltering only slightly at the sight of Liam standing there. "Liam," he said, masking his surprise with a forced smile. "What are you doing here?" Liam's piercing blue eyes held his gaze, steady and unyielding. "We need to talk," he said evenly. "All 3 of us." Chris hesitated, but Melanie appeared behind him, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Liam?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. What are you doing here?" He said. Liam stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Go ahead, Melanie. Close the door. You wouldn't want the cold getting in." The cabin's interior was warm and inviting, but the tension in the air was thick enough to slice. Melanie's face was pale, her earlier glow replaced by unease. Chris recovered quickly, crossing his arms, as if to reclaim his authority in the situation. "Okay, Tuesday." "Look, Liam," Chris began, his tone condescending. "I know this looks bad, but—"
"Save it," Liam interrupted, his voice sharp. He dropped his bag onto the coffee table with a heavy thud, his movements deliberate. "You've done enough talking, both of you."
Melanie's eyes flickered to the bag, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. Liam unzipped it slowly, pulling out a thick stack of documents and photographs, placing them one by one on the table. "This," Liam began, gesturing to the evidence, "is everything I know. Every hotel receipt, every message, every time you thought you were being clever. It's all here. Melanie took a step back, her hand covering her mouth. Chris, however, scoffed, his arrogance bubbling to the surface. What is this, Liam? Some kind of dramatic intervention? You can't possibly think this is— Shut up, Liam said, his voice low but laced with venom. You've had your say for months. Now it's my turn. Liam's gaze shifted to Melanie, who looked as though she might crumble under the weight of his words. 18 years, Melanie, he said, his tone softening but only slightly. 18 years I gave you. And this is how you repay me? Tears welled in her eyes, but Liam wasn't finished. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family, our children. Do you have any idea what this will do to them? I think for a second and realized that Liam was right. She could not hold back any more of her feelings. She fought with the tears. Melanie began, her voice trembling. Liam, I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear, I didn't mean for it to happen, Liam snapped, his calm demeanor fracturing. He pointed to the photographs. You don't accidentally meet someone at a hotel. You don't accidentally sneak away for weekends like this. You planned it, Melanie, every detail. Chris stepped forward, his hands raised defensively. Okay, man, maybe we should all just calm down. Don't you dare, Liam cut in, his glare freezing Chris in his tracks. You don't get to tell me how to feel. You don't get to play the victim here. The room was silent for a moment, the crackling of the fireplace the only sound. Liam took a deep breath, steadying himself. This isn't just about the affair, he said finally, his voice quieter, but no less intense. It's about the lies, the disrespect, the complete disregard for everything we built together. Melanie sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I didn't want it to end like this, she whispered. End? She dared not ask who had promised. She didn't want to say too much. She didn't want anybody to come after her. It didn't have to, Liam said, his voice softer now. But you made your choices. He turned to Chris, his expression hardening once more. And you, he said, stepping closer, you thought you could waltz in and take what wasn't yours? You thought you'd get away with it? Chris opened his mouth to respond, but Liam raised a hand to silence him. You're nothing but a coward, he said, hiding behind lies and sneaking around like a thief. But let me make one thing clear. You will never have what I built. Not my family, not my life. Liam picked up the stack of documents and photographs, placing them back into the bag. I came here tonight to give you both a chance to face the truth, he said, his voice steady once more. To see the damage you've done. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. Actions have consequences, and you'll feel every one of them. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Enjoy your weekend, he said, his tone cutting. It'll be your last one, together. The cold night air hit Liam's face as he stepped outside, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. As he walked back to his truck, the weight on his chest began to lift. He had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. For Liam, the confrontation wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his power, his dignity, and his future. The battle wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next. Melanie and Chris had underestimated him, and now they would face the consequences of their choices. He bolted to his feet, looking ready to fight, and then a hand tapped him on the shoulder to get him moving. When Liam returned home, the house felt eerily silent. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but heavy with anticipation. He stood in the living room, staring at the family photographs on the mantel. The smiles in the images seemed frozen in a happier time, taunting him with the weight of what had been lost. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to grieve, not just for the marriage that was crumbling, but for the man he had been, the man who'd trusted so completely. The next morning, Liam woke early. He wasn't sure if he had slept or simply drifted in and out of a foggy haze. Melanie had sent a text late the previous night, vague and insubstantial. We need to talk. I'll be home this evening, they said, as Bert and Jesse drove into town. One shoulder balking with embarrassment. Liam stared at the words for a long time before setting his phone aside. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the confrontation in the cabin. Typical. Melanie had always been skilled at sidestepping blame, spinning her narratives to suit her needs. But this time, there was no spinning the truth. The evidence was overwhelming, and the confrontation had been the first domino in a chain reaction that neither Melanie nor Chris could control. Mm? 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 Elisa returned with the water and washed for a minute, and then looked up to the next apprentice. No, I don't know exactly what to do here. Kathy, help me. The day passed slowly, each hour stretching endlessly. Liam busied himself with mundane tasks, fixing the squeaky hinge on the kitchen cabinet, raking the leaves in the yard, anything to keep his hands moving and his mind from spiraling. But the quiet moments in between weighed heavily, each tick of the clock reminding him of the impending conversation. When all of that was done, he dumped back into the car and headed home. His mind was hammering the same pattern in reverse, all the minor rat holes pulling him in. Rachel stopped by in the afternoon, her presence a welcome relief. She brought coffee and a steadying presence, sitting across from Liam at the kitchen table. "Do you know what you're going to say?" she asked, her voice calm but probing. Liam shrugged, staring into his coffee cup. "I've gone over it 100 times in my head, but every time it feels insufficient. What do you even say to someone who's destroyed your life?" Rachel reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "You say what's true. Don't worry about being eloquent or even kind. Just speak your truth, Liam. She needs to hear it." He nodded, appreciating her wisdom. Rachel had always been the level-headed one, the person who could see through the chaos and find clarity. But even her presence couldn't quiet the storm entirely. As evening fell, Liam heard the sound of Melanie's car pulling into the driveway. He braced himself, his heart pounding in his chest. She entered the house quietly, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept either, her usual polished appearance replaced by a disheveled vulnerability. Just Liam, she began, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" Liam motioned to the living room, gesturing for her to sit. He didn't join her right away, instead standing near the fireplace, his arms crossed. "I think it's past time we talked," he said, his tone measured but firm. "Go ahead, Melanie. Say what you need to say." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I know that doesn't even begin to cover it, but I am. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Oh, da-da-da." Liam's jaw tightened. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" "Melanie, affairs don't just happen. They take planning, decisions, lies. You made a choice every step of the way." Tears welled in her eyes, but Liam felt no sympathy. He had cried enough for both of them already. "I don't know why I did it," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lost. I felt trapped, like I wasn't myself anymore." "Trapped?" Liam snapped, his composure slipping. "You felt trapped in the life we built together? The life I worked myself to the bone to provide for? You weren't trapped, Melanie. You were selfish." Those aren't words for someone. The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Melanie wiped at her tears, her shoulders slumping. "You're right," she admitted. "I was selfish, but I never stopped loving you, Liam. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I did." Liam shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Love? Don't you dare call this love. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't lie. Whatever you felt, Melanie, it wasn't love." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crackling of the fire filled the silence, an odd comfort in the midst of the turmoil. Finally, Melanie looked up at him, her eyes desperate. "Can we fix this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we try to put it back together? Liam stared at her, his heart torn. There was a part of him that wanted to say yes, to believe that they could somehow repair the damage. But the other part, the part that had endured weeks of lies and betrayal, knew the truth. No, he said firmly, we can't.
Melanie broke down, her sobs filling the room. Liam watched her, his own emotions a tumultuous wave of anger, sadness, and relief. It was over, he realized. The marriage he had fought so hard to preserve was gone, shattered beyond repair. Ben sat down heavily on the sofa beside Melanie. It was over, he realized.
I'll be filing for divorce, he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. I'll make sure the kids are taken care of. But I can't do this anymore, Melanie. I won't. She didn't argue, didn't plead. For once, she seemed to understand the gravity of her actions. I'm so sorry, she said again, her voice hollow. Sorry was undeniable, but an act of optimism prompted a weekly shower in her villa in Biaffe. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable. I know. After Melanie left the room, Liam sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. He felt hollow, as though a part of him had been carved out and discarded. But amid the emptiness, there was also a flicker of something else. Freedom. The chains of betrayal had been heavy, but now that they were broken, he could finally begin to rebuild. When Derda enters the room, the chains of betrayal were broken off. A light breaking through the breeze of fresh air, she took Liam's hand in hers, pulling him to her feet. In the days that followed, Liam began the process of untangling his life from Melanie's. He contacted his lawyer, ensuring that every step of the divorce would be handled with precision. He spoke with his children, explaining the situation as gently as he could without sparing the truth. It was one of the hardest conversations he had ever had, but their resilience surprised him. They were stronger than he had given them credit for. Rachel remained by his side, a steady presence in the chaos. You'll get through this, she told him one evening, as they sat on the porch. It won't be easy, but you will. Liam nodded, her words a balm to his weary soul. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the first time her words had been repeated to him, but he remembered it now. Even the things that sucked, like sitting around all day, and the fallout from Melanie's betrayal was far-reaching, touching every corner of Liam's life. But amid the wreckage, he found a newfound strength, a resolve to rebuild, not for Melanie, not even for his children, but for himself. He had been broken, but he was not defeated. And as he stood on the threshold of this new chapter, he knew one thing for certain. He would rise. The weeks following Melanie's departure were a blur of legal documents, late-night thoughts, and a steady stream of adjustments to a life that no longer felt familiar. Liam had expected the pain, but what surprised him was the sheer weight of the silence in the house. It wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet he once cherished after long workdays. It was a hollow echo that reminded him of what was gone. Yet, amid the grief, Liam began to find clarity. This was a chance not just to move past the betrayal, but to rebuild a life on his own terms. So, at the beginning of November, Liam created a website called Liam.Brothers. Liam's first step was addressing his children. He sat them down one evening, their faces etched with confusion and a hint of fear. It was the kind of conversation he had dreaded, but he knew it was necessary. Oh, it was usually called Dockertenter? He asked the drummer. Your mother and I, he began, his voice steady but low. We're not going to be together anymore. It's not your fault. None of this is. But it's important you know the truth. The children's questions came slowly at first, then in a rush, overlapping one another. What happened? Will we still see Mom? Are we moving? Liam answered each question honestly but carefully, shielding them from the harshest details while ensuring they felt secure. By the end of the conversation, the initial shock had softened into an uneasy acceptance. They clung to him that night, their hugs tighter than they'd ever been before. For the first time in weeks, Liam felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Mm, mm, um, Probably, he said finally, then put a hand on his heart. Probably, no, not. In the weeks that followed, Liam focused on creating a new normal for his family. He rearranged the house, clearing out traces of Melanie's presence not out of spite but to reclaim the space. He turned her old craft room into a library for the children, filling the shelves with books they could explore together. He also spent more time with them, driving them to school, attending their sports games, and helping with homework. Small gestures, but they helped fill the void and strengthened their bond. One afternoon, Rachel stopped by unannounced, her arms laden with groceries. "You looked like you could use a decent meal," she said with a grin. And Liam smirked, grateful for her constant support. "Is this your way of saying I've been eating like a bachelor?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "You're not that far gone. Yet." So, over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Rachel shared updates about her life, her garden, and her job, while Liam opened up about his plans for the future. "I want to start my own business," he said, surprising himself as much as Rachel. "Something small but meaningful. Maybe custom home renovations. Things people actually care about. This sounds perfect," Rachel said, her smile genuine. "You're good at building things, Liam. You always have been." The words stuck with him long after Rachel left. He hadn't realized how much he needed someone to believe in him again. The divorce proceedings were grueling, each step forcing Liam to relive the betrayal. Melanie was civil but distant, her once vivid presence dulled by guilt and resignation. At first, she tried to reach out, offering half-hearted apologies and suggestions to make things easier. But Liam shut that down quickly. Victor read the story to others in the residence who were impressed. "Melanie," he said during one particularly tense phone call, "this isn't about making things easier, it's about making things right. And we're far past apologies." The settlement was fair, and though it left a bitter taste in Liam's mouth, he took solace in knowing the process was finally over. With the divorce finalized, Liam threw himself into his work. He took on small projects at first, fixing a neighbor's deck, restoring an old friend's kitchen. Each task felt like therapy, the act of creation mending the parts of him that had been broken. Word spread quickly about Liam's craftsmanship and dedication. Before long, he had more clients than he could handle, and he started hiring a small team. His new business, Legacy Restorations, became a beacon of his resilience and a way to channel his energy into something positive. So life wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when Liam found himself staring at the empty side of the bed, memories of Melanie's laughter echoing in his mind. On those nights, he allowed himself to grieve, to feel the loss fully, but he never let it consume him. Each morning he rose with renewed purpose, determined to move forward. Once, Melanie favored him and took him to dinner, but he quit too soon to properly appreciate it. One unexpected blessing came in the form of his children. Without the shadow of the failing marriage hanging over them, their relationships blossomed. His daughter began sharing stories about her school friends, confiding in him in ways she never had before. His son, once distant and absorbed in his video games, started joining Liam in the workshop, learning the trade and forging a bond that Liam had feared was lost. After a few months, the darkened situation began to lighten a little, and the pain had passed away a little bit. It wasn't perfect. They missed their mother, and there were moments of sadness and anger that Liam couldn't fully mend, but he listened, supported, and reassured them that they were loved. That, he realized, was enough. Trying to clear his thoughts, he peered deeper into Ria's bag of stories and what Liam had dreamed since birth, and now it was happening. Months turned into a year, and Liam found himself in a place he hadn't expected: contentment. He had a thriving business, a strong connection with his children, and a support system that included Rachel and a few close friends who had stood by him through the storm. He even began to entertain the idea of dating again, though he approached it cautiously. A chance encounter with a kind-hearted woman named Erin, who ran a local coffee shop, sparked something he hadn't felt in years: a flicker of hope. They started with casual conversations, then coffee dates, each interaction reminding Liam that he was capable of connection and trust. On the anniversary of the confrontation at the cabin, Liam drove to the mountains alone. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or why. The drive was long and winding, the memories of that night resurfacing with every mile. When he arrived, he stood outside the cabin for a long time, taking in the quiet. The place was unchanged, a stark contrast to how much his life had transformed. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep sense of closure. Liam sat on a nearby rock, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. He thought about the man he had been, the pain he had endured, and the strength he had found. He wasn't the same person who had stood in this spot a year ago, but he was proud of who he had become. When Liam returned home that evening, his children greeted him with hugs, their laughter filling the house. He smiled, knowing that, despite everything, they were his greatest achievement. As he tucked them into bed, his daughter asked, "Dad, are you happy?" Liam paused, her question catching him off guard. He thought about it for a moment before answering. "I think I'm getting there," he said, kissing her forehead. And for the first time in a long while, Liam truly believed it.